Two people look at the same apple. Each brain receives light signals. Each mind constructs a separate image from electrochemical data alone. The apple does not enter your skull, you build it. And yet you and a stranger, looking at the same apple, see exactly the same red, the same shape, the same apple. The question is not small. Quantum mechanics says every observation is separate. Every measurement collapses its own wave function. There is no equation in physics that forces two independent observers to agree on the same classical reality. And yet every observer does. A physicist named Zurek spent decades building a mathematical framework to answer a question philosophers had asked for centuries. Why does the quantum world, where nothing is certain until measured, produce a classical world where everyone agrees on the same apple? His answer was unexpected. He found a key part of the answer in copying. In 788 CE, the philosopher Shankara had already described the mechanism. He called it Maya, the appearance of a shared world arising from one undivided awareness. Zurek's mathematics and Shankara's philosophy describe the same structure from opposite directions, 12 centuries apart. And a 5th-century Buddhist philosopher named Vasubandhu found the piece that connects them by asking the question neither had asked directly. If all experience is constructed within consciousness, why does the construction stay the same across billions of separate minds? This video maps all three investigations. What they agree on changes what you understand yourself to be in the act of seeing. The problem begins with what quantum mechanics actually says about reality before observation. Before you measure an electron's position, the electron does not have one. It exists in a superposition, a spread of all possible positions simultaneously. The act of measurement forces a single outcome. This works perfectly for particles in a laboratory. It creates a crisis when you scale up. An apple is made of quantum particles. Each particle exists in superposition, yet the apple has a definite position, color, and shape at all times for every observer. How does a quantum object become a classical one? The answer developed through the 1970s and 1980s is called decoherence. When a quantum system, such as an apple, interacts with its environment, its quantum superpositions do not collapse for one observer and stay open for others. They leak. The quantum information about the apple spreads into the photons reflecting off its surface, into the air molecules touching it, into every particle in the environment. It copies itself into everything. The apple becomes entangled with its environment. Once entangled, its quantum behavior effectively vanishes, replaced by classical, definite properties. Decoherence explains why large objects behave classically. It does not fully explain why you and the person next to you see the same apple. Zurek's contribution goes one step further. Working at Los Alamos National Laboratory, he published the framework of quantum Darwinism in the journal Nature Physics in 2009. His key observation: when the apple's quantum information spreads into the photons in the environment, it does not spread once. It copies. The same classical information about the apple, its position, its color, its shape, gets redundantly encoded into millions of photons simultaneously. You do not look at the apple directly. You look at the photons that carry its information. The person next to you looks at different photons. The person across the room looks at different photons still. But all those photons carry the same encoded message. The environment acts as a witness, a redundant record. Every observer samples a different copy of the same original. This is what Zurek named quantum Darwinism. Only one kind of information survives, the kind that copies itself, redundantly, into everything. That information becomes a shared classical reality. The implication is precise. The shared world is not a coincidence. It is not a collapse happening once for everyone. One quantum process, writing its signature into every available medium. Every observer looks at a different copy. Every observer finds the same answer. One source, redundant copies, shared reality. Before the ancient parallel, the mainstream position must be stated clearly. Decoherence and quantum Darwinism are purely physical processes. They require no consciousness, no observer, no mind. The environment does the work. The information copies itself into photons regardless of whether anyone is watching. The shared classical world emerges from physics alone, no philosophy required. Advaita Vedanta's claim that there is one underlying consciousness in which all perception occurs is a philosophical and experiential position, not a measurement. The structural parallel this video presents is precisely that, a structural parallel. Two independent investigations describing the same phenomenon from different directions. Zurek explains the mechanism, how one quantum source produces a shared classical reality. Shankara asks the question Zurek's framework cannot answer from within physics. What is the nature of the awareness that is receiving all those redundant copies? Two instruments, the same territory. Before Shankara's answer, test this directly for 20 seconds. Right now, you are seeing these words. Another person watching this is seeing the same words. Two separate brains, two separate nervous systems, the same words. Notice how strange that actually is. Not as a philosophical proposition, as something genuinely odd about your current experience. That strangeness is exactly where Shankara began. Ekam evadvityam Brahma. Brahman is one, without a second. 3 words from the Chandogya Upanishad, chapter 6, verse 2.1. Written by the philosopher Shankara in 788 CE as the complete answer to the question Zurek would spend his career investigating. Shankara was born in Kerala. He died at approximately 32 years old. In that time, he had written commentaries on the Brahma Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita, and 10 major Upanishads, and established the school known as Advaita Vedanta. Advaita means non-dual. In Shankara's view, the shared world is not grounded in physical processes, but in the fact that there is ultimately only one awareness. Maya is the name for this appearance of multiplicity. And here the precision of the term matters. Maya does not mean the world is an illusion in the sense of being unreal. Maya means the world of apparent multiplicity, the world of separate objects and separate observers, is not the final description of reality. The apple is real as an appearance. Its separateness from you is real as an appearance. Your separateness from the person next to you is real as an appearance. What Maya points to is the substratum of that appearance, the one awareness within which both you and the apple and the other observer arise. The Chandogya Upanishad states this in the Mahavakya, the great saying, Tattvam Asi. You are that. Chapter 6, verse 8.7. The Brahman that underlies the shared world is the same as the Atman, the awareness that is present in you right now reading this. Not metaphorically, structurally. Now map this to Zurek's framework. Zurek, one quantum system, redundantly copies its information into the environment. Every observer samples the same source. Shared reality emerges from one origin. Shankara, one Brahman, one awareness, appears as many. Every apparent observer is a modification of that one awareness. Shared reality exists because the observers are not ultimately separate. Zurek's shared reality is a product of information physics. Shankara's shared reality is a product of ontology of what ultimately exists. Both describe the same structure: one source, apparent multiplicity, shared experience. 12 centuries apart, no cross-referencing, same structure. Shankara explains the shared world from the ground up. One Brahman, one awareness, all multiplicity apparent. Vasubandhu approaches the same territory from the opposite direction entirely. Not from the ground up, but from the structure of perception itself. He does not begin by asserting one consciousness. He begins by asking what perception actually is when examined from the inside. And he arrives at the same structural conclusion from a completely different method. Vasubandhu asked a question neither Zurek nor Shankara had formulated in this way. If experience is representation within consciousness, why does that representation stay consistent across billions of minds? Why does your apple match mine? Vasubandhu was working in the 4th to 5th century CE. His school, Vijnanavada, is sometimes translated as the consciousness-only school. In his text, the Vimsatika, the 20 verses, he makes a precise argument. What we call external objects are not independent entities existing outside of mind. They are representations within consciousness. This raises the same problem quantum Darwinism solves. If all experience is representation within consciousness, why do two separate minds represent the same external thing? Vasubandhu's answer introduces the concept of alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. Not a personal unconscious, a shared field in which all experiential seeds are held. The consistency of shared experience arises because individual minds are not separate containers drawing on private stores. They are localized expressions of a shared underlying field. Every mind drawing from the same storehouse produces representations that correspond. The way every observer in Zurek's framework samples the same redundantly encoded information from the same environmental field. Now map all three investigations side by side. Zurek. One quantum system. Redundant information copies. Shared classical reality. Shankara. One Brahman. Maya of multiplicity. Shared apparent world. Vasubandhu. One alaya vijnana. Localized minds drawing from the same field. Consistent representation. Three independent frameworks. Three independent methods. One structural answer. The shared world is not a coincidence. It is not a miracle. It is the signature of one underlying process writing itself into every available channel. The three-way structural correspondence. On the question of source, Zurek one quantum system is the origin of the shared classical world, Shankara. One Brahman is the origin of all apparent multiplicity, Vasubandhu. One alaya vijnana is the shared field from which individual representations arise. On the question of multiplicity, Zurek. Multiple observers sample different copies of the same redundantly encoded information, Shankara. Multiple apparent observers are modifications of the same one awareness, Vasubandhu. Multiple individual minds are localized expressions of the same shared storehouse. On the question of what the shared world is, Zurek. It is the subset of quantum information that survives by copying itself into the environment, Shankara. It is the appearance of Maya, real as experience, not ultimate as ontology, Vasubandhu. It is a consistent representation arising from a shared field, not independent confirmation of external objects. Physics cannot yet measure what the shared awareness is that receives all those redundant copies. Shankara says, "It is what you are, right now, reading this." Vasubandhu says, "It is the ground from which your mind arises." Both say, the separation between you and the other observer is real as appearance. It is not the final description. The Advaita investigation is precise and does not require a monastery. Shankara's method is direct inquiry. Test this directly for 30 seconds, not as a philosophy, as a direct observation. Right now, there is awareness present. You are seeing these words. Something is seeing them. Now look for the boundary of that awareness, not the boundary of your body, the boundary of the seeing itself. Where does your awareness end and the awareness of the person next to you begin? If you cannot find a boundary, notice what that means for the question. Shankara's proposition is not that you are everything, it is that the awareness present in you and the awareness present in the other observer share the same nature. The same quality of being awake, the same quality of knowing. Zurek found that the shared world arises from one quantum source copying itself redundantly. Shankara found that the shared world arises because the awareness receiving all those copies is, in its fundamental nature, one. Two instruments, one territory. The apple was never separate from the seeing was never as separate as it appeared. Wojciech Zurek asked why billions of observers build the same classical world from quantum data. Shankara asked what the awareness doing all that building actually is. Vasubandhu asked why separate minds draw from the same source before any observer looks. 3 investigations, 1 structural answer. Ancient wisdom, quantum mystery, direct knowing. If the question about the boundary of awareness resonated, the next investigation maps it in the opposite direction. Not what awareness shares with others, but what it is when it encounters nothing at all. That investigation is in the description.